Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, 12 Strange, Fascinating, and Useful Termite Facts, brought to you by Pest Management Professional Magazine and our sponsor of the event, Control Solutions, Inc. I'm Mackenzie Shoemaker, Content Marketing Producer for Pest Management Professional Magazine, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. You are currently in a listen-only mode. A recording of this webinar will be posted to mypmp.net/webinars and will also be emailed to you tomorrow. At this time, I'd like to get you comfortable with our console and the ways you can participate during today's presentation. Please note the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your console. If you have a question, type it into the panel's text box, then click Submit to place your question in queue. You may also use the hashtag PMPWebinar on Twitter to submit questions during today's webinar, or to enter into discussion with other attendees. We encourage you to ask and enter any questions you may have for our speaker during the presentation. We will address these questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A portion. Questions submitted during registration have already gone to our speaker and may be covered during the presentation. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, you may use the same Q&A panel on your screen to submit your issue, and PMP staff Ellen Wagner or Aurora Harris will personally assist you. You may learn more about today's speaker by viewing the photo, bio, and contact information in the panel located on the upper left-hand side of your console. If you're logged into your social media accounts, you can share the webinar's title, description, and URL with your friends or colleagues using the Share This widget. Today, we will be hearing from Dr. Janis Reed, Board Certified Entomologist, Technical Service Director for Control Solutions, Inc. Dr. Reed brings with her more than 20 years of experience, including more than a decade with a large, independently owned pest management company as the Staff Entomologist and Technical Director. Other roles have included several years of research and pesticide education experience. In her role with CSI, she works with industry researchers for product efficacy trials, supports the CSI sales and marketing teams, and supports the pest management industry on behalf of CSI. Now I will pass it off to Dr. Reed. Go ahead and take it away. Dr. Reed, are you there?
Okay, can you guys hear me now? All right, we'll back up a little bit because apparently I wasn't off mute. Okay, does everybody hear me now? Okay, we're just going to keep going. I'm going to start over. All right, so 12 useful and fascinating termite facts. So the goal here was to put together a presentation that was a little different, something that you haven't heard before, maybe something that's a little different than this is different from an ant because, again, something different. So that was the goal in putting this together today. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and jump in, since I lost a little bit of time, to termites and their history. So termites have been on our planet for a really, really long time. So this is kind of an infographic of the timeline for all life on our planet, you know, going way back to the Paleozoic time and then going to modern times where, you know, we move into the Cenozoic period. Where I have the arrow here is about where we think insects and then ultimately termites evolved. So we move into the Cretaceous period with a number of different termite types. So these Mesozoic records from the Cretaceous period, we know at least 3 different termite groups are represented: the Mastotermitids, the Termopsids, and the Hodotermitids. We know that they were primitive but reasonably diversified during that time. The evolutionary history of these insects, of specifically termites, is very interesting to entomologists for a number of reasons. So the first is that termites are eusocial. They are social insects, so they have that caste differentiation. They do different things. Each of the groups of castes do different things, but also because termites are such important members of the ecology of our planet, because they consume cellulose and because they are detritivores, which makes them important to our planet and to our ecosystem. So they look deeply into fossils because it's where we can see direct evidence of the past. So fossils become really important and the fossil record becomes very important. And we know a lot of these species existed only because of a single specimen in some cases. And in some cases, we don't even have the insect. We might only have maybe a wing vein to use in identification of these termites. It's important to note that in the fossil record, most of the termites that we know of are alates, because those are the ones that were preserved in the fossil record. So we know that termites have a worldwide distribution. There's about 3,000 species plus worldwide. And if you think about like species richness over the planet, most of that species richness is in Africa. You think a third of the species known are in Africa. Termites are particularly speciose in the subtropical and tropical regions. Some other more interesting things is they're one of the very first organisms on our planet to show mutualism, where we have the merriment or the brought together of these insects, these termites, and also their gut symbionts. Again, those soft exoskeletons, the workers, are really going to prevent that the species richness in cooler climates. So let's kind of move on to this next slide, and that is that termites have undertakers. So, and this is not like the wrestler, the undertaker. I'm talking about like as a job in the termite colony. So this came from a study called Managing Corpses from Different Castes in the Eastern Subterranean Termite. And this was a joint venture that was put together with a bunch of different places, including the University of Kentucky, Louisiana State, and also a Chinese group as well. So what they wanted to do is, how do termites deal with their dead? And what they found was that termites do have undertakers. And if you think about this, it's very important for overall colony health to deal with your dead, right? You can't just ignore the dead bodies in and around the colony. So what did we learn from this study? So these authors basically found that the longevity, or how long a termite has been dead, will determine how they are handled by the workers in the colony. They also determine that different castes of termites are handled just a little bit differently from other castes. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So if termites are freshly dead, they will be collected from the test area, brought back to the colony, and in most cases are cannibalized. If they are workers with long wing buds, removing the worker took a little bit longer, but freshly dead soldiers, freshly dead workers were both collected and both cannibalized fairly consistently. So one of the questions that I kind of asked was, well, why do termites cannibalize their dead workers and soldiers? And I think there are three potential explanations for why they do this. The first is nutrient recycling. Things like chitin, complex molecules that are complicated for termites and other insects to make, you can just eat it, and there you go. It's another great way to share gut symbionts. So if you think about trophallaxis, where they share food from mouth to mouth or mouth to rear, you can have gut symbiont sharing by cannibalizing. And then by cannibalizing, you're also preventing pathogen development that might grow on dead bodies. So you're removing that as a source of potential growth for those pathogens. So a lot of different reasons to cannibalize these insects. So here's kind of the schematic from the paper kind of showing what happens. So you can see their detection time for detecting the dead termites is pretty the same, whether you're talking about workers or soldiers. And then the detection time between the short wing bud nymphs and the long wing bud nymphs are the same, but the short wing bud nymphs are detected just a bit faster than the long wing bud nymphs, but statistically very similar. Then in this bottom chart, you can see duration. How long did it take them to retrieve them and move them back into the colony area? You can see workers and soldiers almost identical, and the larger nymphs, the short wing bud and long wing bud nymphs, just a little bit longer. So again, we see that detection time fairly short, and removing them into the colony to be cannibalized also very short. So, 30 minutes to less than an hour overall, which is very, very fast for a colony of termites. So what about not so fresh bodies? So if you have bodies that are over 64 hours, they've been dead for over 64 hours, things change just a little bit. So workers, when they found it, it was pretty much buried on site, wherever the body was found. If it was soldier termites, they often both walled off where the soldier was found and buried it. So bury it and then don't go in this area. Again, this was probably to separate the decomposed bodies from the colony and prevent any further disease transmission, and again, to avoid contact with predators and other competitors. So again, just a way to protect the colony with these not so fresh bodies. So here's the schematic for that, the figure from the actual paper. And as you can see, they have burying the worker, walling off the soldier, and then also burying and walling off down here at the bottom in the connecting dish. So overall behavioral responses, burial quite a bit in the long wing bud, short wing bud, and workers, and then a little bit of walling off and moving burial in the soldiers. So again, fairly consistent behavior to just bury those termites and move on when they are, again, not so fresh bodies. So the next question is, why should you care? I talked about the fossil record. I've talked about how termites take out their dead. Well, why do we care? Well, most of the liquid termiticides used for structural protection in modern America and, well, most of the world are non-repellents. And the baits that are used are also non-repellent. So if an individual termite, worker termite, receives a lethal dose of one of these products, it's possible that that active ingredient can be kind of recycled back into the colony via this cannibalism I've just described. So this is another mechanism that those active ingredients might be moved throughout a colony so that each individual termite doesn't have to interact with either the treated area or the bait material. So this could explain how this transmission occurs from termite to termite. So some very interesting data coming out of that study. So let's move on to fact number 3, and that is termites are used as food. Now, I think we all can recognize that termites are an important food source to other animals. I've listed several that I found papers and direct evidence that termites are eaten by all of these animals, including, aardvarks and anteaters. I think that was a funny one to include. Bats, birds, moles, nematodes, and even some primates use tools to extract termites from various substances, and we've seen that in the field. But we also have evidence that termites are used as human food. There's a lot of places in Africa where consuming termites is considered very common, and it's a normal food that's consumed there. Alates are probably the most consumed stage, and collection, as you can imagine, is very seasonal based on when those insects swarm. So it's kind of make hay while the sun shines. This is a image from a paper I'm going to talk about in just a minute, where they talk about harvesting termites as human food. And there's a lot of different ways they might collect them. Sometimes it's through a light trap, and then they fall into some sort of container, a clean container. There is, usually they do this in the evening, sometimes by placing a water under a light source. The water reflects the light source, termites are attracted to it, fall into the water, and they can't get out. Sometimes they build like a dome out of leaves or a blanket over the immersion hole, and they collect the insects there, sort of in that little basket or collection device. So there's also, they'll prepare smoke and blow it into an opening. So lots of different ways that these insects can be collected, but it is definitely an important part of diets in many parts of the world, and I just think we all should be aware of that. Termites are also very nutritious. So again, from Fongbong and Kyururu, I'm sure I'm butchering that, termites as food, they kind of looked at a bunch of different termites, and on average found that termites contain about 32% protein, about 40% fat, and are fairly low carb. So very nutritious food that can be easily collected. So that brings us to the same question. Does this information help a PMP? Well, if you ever find yourself on the keto diet, perhaps termites would be a good option because they are low in carbs. Maybe if you find yourself on a deserted island and you need a food source, perhaps you could use termites as a food source. How does it help a PMP in his average daily life? Maybe not much, but it's certainly interesting information, and think about how things are done in other parts of the world. All right, fact number 4. Termite colonies can be founded in many different ways. So most of us know that termites swarm, the king and the queen pair up, they shed their wings, they create a nest chamber, that the queen will lay her first clutch of eggs, usually 6 to 12. The queen will then care for this first batch of eggs, and then when those hatch and they can forage, these first workers will then forage on nearby cellulose material, decaying wood, mulch, anything like that. And then as more workers are produced, the nest galleries will expand and they forage further from the colony. These new colonies grow very slowly, and after the first year or so, a lot of these termite colonies will only contain about 50 or so termites. And then maybe after a couple of years, only a few hundred. But then over time, you start growing them into large numbers. And usually it's going to take 5+ years to really get numbers built up where you can have a swarming event. So we also know that these primary reproductives, these first kings and queens, can survive long periods of time in the nest. And we're going to talk about more about that in just a minute. Okay, so we believe, a lot of PMPs believe that swarming is really the only way that termites can create new colonies, but that's not true. There are many other ways that termites can create new separate colonies. In some cases, you can have a portion of termites that is separated from a colony, and this new subcolony will become a standalone independent colony. We call this splitting. You might have heard the term budding before as it pertains to ants. But if you think about this, like what types of events could lead to this potential of behavior? And I mean, if you think about like construction events, building big roads, building like water lines, putting in new water lines, all of those kind of things could potentially separate colonies and give you that split colony. So how does this help a PMP? Well, from my perspective, the more we understand about how these termites move through the three-dimensional subterranean space, the more we can really understand how they're entering structures. And also, understanding how colonies are founded helps us better to understand what is true colony elimination, especially if you have several colonies on the same property. So again, just kind of gives us a different way to look at what is a colony and how does a colony split over time. All right, so let's move on to fact 5, and I promised you this. We know that termite kings and queens are long-lived. So how do they live so long? So termite reproductives exhibit two unusual things. They have extremely long lifespans, and during that lifespan have a very high reproductive output. And this is unusual in the animal world. And so termites have been studied fairly extensively by people especially interested in aging research. They want to understand how these insects can live such long, highly reproductive lives, and how this is shaped by natural selection. So the paper I'm going to talk about here comes from Why and How Do Termite Kings and Queens Live So Long, from Philosophical Interactions from last year. So we'll kind of show you this image from that paper. And this is kind of a summary of what the authors believed were the main characteristics separated between ecological and physiological that help termite reproductives live so long. So this was the paper summarized in a single table. So you can see there's nest defense, where there are things in the actual nest that provide defensive behavior by the non-reproductives. You have social immunity. This is when you have an adaptive mechanism that helps pathogens not move through the colony, which we've talked a little bit about. Group foraging. It's not just one person or one individual responsible for foraging. We also know that termites live in a hypoxic environment. That means low oxygen. So how does this help them? And we know that this nest could protect them from oxygen toxicity. There are other physiological characteristics, antioxidant stress resistance, DNA repair, transpond resistance, which basically means a part of the DNA gets moved, and then other things where they actually regulate how their DNA is read and how that reaction occurs. So the authors say, back one more, that this study raises the possibility that termite reproductive achieves longevity without sacrificing reproduction, not only through efficient antioxidant systems that transpose on defense, which talked about a little bit, but that basically means a DNA sequence that can change its position within a genome, and they can move those around, and downregulation of the growth signaling, but also through metabolic adaptation to that low oxygen environment. So what does this all mean to PMPs? If you have a colony, that colony can live long periods of time based only on the longevity of the king and the queen. So being able to manage a colony also means being able to manage the king and the queen. And that's why non-repellent active ingredients and bait products are so effective, is because they are able to move through the colony and ultimately reach the reproductive center of that colony. So the next fact we're going to talk about is that termites are beneficial insects. So I think most people understand that, beneficial insects exist. We know about ladybugs, we know about honeybees, we know about assassin bugs and lacewings and all these other bugs that are beneficial and that show up on children's clothing. But what we don't really focus on as a beneficial insect in our society is termites. And they are such an important decomposer in our ecosystem to recycle nutrients from above ground to below ground. There are only a few organisms on this planet that can digest cellulose, and some of these, obviously here, horses, cows, sheep, goats, bison, buffalo, deer, antelope. We don't think about fungus and mold, but they are also very important nutrient recyclers and detritivores. So again, very important group of nutrient recyclers that, just don't get a lot of respect as beneficial organisms and being able to break down cellulose. So again, beneficial roles of termites include breaking down those dead trees, all that dead cellulose, aerating the soil during their tunneling activities, and physically moving nutrients into the soil after feeding via their poop. They poop a lot. So they are helping our environment by just doing their termite due. How does this help a PMP? Ultimately, we need to be able to explain to our clients and our customers that not all termites are bad. And if you have termites living on a property, it's not necessarily a red flag that you only need to kill right then. If they're not in a property, if they're not in something that is valuable or a structure, I kind of let them alone, but obviously use that as an early warning system. All right, next one we're going to talk about is termites' interaction with other animals. So the next couple of strange and interesting facts are actually interaction facts. So the first one we're going to talk about are ants. Now, I've seen people talk about how ants and termites are horrible, just enemies, and that is true. They are probably the most important organism that impacts termite behavior because they have so many individuals. There was a paper I found recently that estimated 8.6 million ants per hectare in the Amazonian rainforest. So you're talking about huge numbers of ants in the same areas that these insects are foraging in. Ants are able to go above and below ground. They're very dominant in the ecosystem, and their predation, how they feed, can shape entire insect communities. So there's even ant species that are specialist predators and feed only on termites. But for the most part, ant predation is opportunistic. You find something that looks, little cream-filled kind, and you eat it. So they're not looking for termites, you just find them and they consume them. So another example of insects that interact with termites are this particular type of beetle in the family Staphylinidae. And this is just one example that I just pulled out, but there are more than 200 described species that potentially live exclusively in termite nests. This is just one of them. So this genus, Coratoca, I believe is how you say it, is a highly modified beetle. It's flightless. The adult females actually give birth to live young. They do not have an egg stage. And honestly, not a ton known about this group, but this close association with termites very well established. Here is an image from the paper listed below on the chemical disguise of a physogastric Termitophilus rove beetle. And as you can see up at the top is the actual termite. The bottom two pictures are the beetles. And you can see there's a remarkable resemblance between the termite and this beetle. They're about the same size. The beetle has folded its abdomen in such a way that it's about the same size as the termite, and they're both, again, living in the same place. So again, very termitophilic, require termites to survive. A very interesting little termitophile beetle. So how does this information help a PMP? It doesn't. I got to be honest, it doesn't. But it's just very interesting to know and to learn that termites are not just a colony of termites only. There are many other different organisms that can live within that colony that is maybe neither helping nor hurting, but are definitely there. And that brings us to the next one, and that is what I'm calling a weird relationship. And these are a group of fungus that produces a habitat sharing behavior with termites. So we know that termites and fungus share a long history together. They live in the same places. They are both important wood decomposers. But what they discovered recently was a particular type of fungus that forms these termite balls that are harbored in termite nests and are actually sort of cared for by the termite workers and are held in the termite egg chambers. So what they wanted to know was, well, why? So this came from a paper called Cuckoo Fungus Mimics Termite Eggs by producing the cellulose-digesting enzyme B-glucosidase. So what they found is, if you can see here in between the eggs, you'll see those little termite balls. And the authors showed that this fungus, these little fungal balls, produces a cellulose-digesting enzyme, that B-glucosidase. And what they believe is this is an egg recognition pheromone that the termites use. So the way they found this out is they actually coated some glass beads with this particular enzyme, and the termites treated them like eggs as well. So very interesting behavior for this fungus to behave or want to be behaving like a termite egg. So these enzymes produced by the fungal balls are also found in salivary secretions of termites. So we kind of figure out that the overlap of these organisms in the fact that they're decomposers and they share similar chemicals could lead to this origin of egg mimicry. So you have all these random cooperative behaviors that you see between termites and other organisms. So again, this is another one where, well, this is all interesting, Janis, but how does this help me as a PMP? Well, one of the things that I think this really drives home is the fact that termites are extremely complex creatures, and they have very complex relationships with not just their internal symbionts that help them digest cellulose, but also other termitophilic beetles we just talked about, fungus that live within the colony. So all kinds of different organizational relationships happening within this one group of animals. So again, just helping us understand how complex these animals are. All right, so let's move on to strange information number 9, and that's termite castes are not predetermined. So unlike other social insects, and I'll use bees for example, honeybees, if you're going to become a queen, you're fed a completely different food when you're developing as an egg. If you're going to become a drone, something very different occurs. But with termites, castes are not predetermined. So we've already talked about how termites have a caste system and that those caste systems help with division of labor within the colony. And a lot of times these castes have specialized morphologies based on their tasks. So if you think about the large head capsule we know in soldier termites, or the development of wing buds in late instar nymphs who are going to become alates. And we also know that termites have very large, very diverse nests that require this division of labor to be sure that you cover all of your bases as a colony. But termites, like I mentioned, do not have a set task that each individual is going to become. All the larvae hatch from eggs, and each individual larvae ultimately has the potential to develop into any caste. And each of these individual larvae has the potential to be either fertile or non-fertile. So if you look at the two pathways here, you have the king and the queen, the reproductives. Those reproductives produce an egg. That egg then hatches to an early instar larva. Now, there are kind of two different pathways here. We have a linear pathway kind of on the left and a bifurcated pathway on the right, where you have either the late instar larva leading to a nymph or leading to a worker, or you have the late instar larvae leading to any of those. So there are some kind of still arguments about which of these is really the way in which it's occurring, but we do know that there is not a set way that these insects reach soldierhood or alates or a pre-soldier or whatever. Anybody can become anything as they are developing. As I mentioned, castes are divided into two types of termites, fertile and non-fertile. Those fertile termites include primary reproductives, secondary reproductives, and the non-fertile termites are your workers and your soldiers. So as an egg hatches, it has the potential to head in either direction. There's a lot of factors that lead to caste determination. Some of them are nutritional, some of them are seasonal, temperature and humidity factors. Some there is a social interaction among the castes. And then there's also some sex determination. So for some termites, sex can determine caste. So there's at least one species known to have only males as soldiers, but that's not necessarily the case for all termites. And there's also pheromone and hormone levels that can lead to caste determination. So we also know that colonies can change their inner conditions by individual action of the colony members. So as those colony members interact, it can change how the individuals respond. So classically, assuming that all eggs contain similar or identical, in some cases, genetic information, caste development or the fate of what you're going to become is depending on all those factors we just talked about that are experienced during late egg development. And then you have the sex factor and then a few other things going on. So again, not set in stone and can change. So again, how does this help a PMP? I think this is going back to what I said earlier about having a very complex superorganism that we're dealing with and trying to manage. And by having such a complex organism, we have to be very sophisticated in how we detect, how we treat, and how we ultimately manage termite infestations in structures. So that's basically where it comes from. It all comes back down to know thy enemy and understanding how your enemy is responding. All right, fact number 10, it's tough to be a growing termite. So termites are hemimetabolists, and basically what that means is they have gradual metamorphosis. This is the same type of metamorphosis that we see in things like bed bugs and cockroaches. They have several molts that they're going to experience before they reach their final molt and their final caste determination. So molting is probably very traumatic for immature insects, and we're going to talk about this. So according to a paper that I'll talk about which one in just a minute, there are 4 phases of molting. So they're listed here. You have abdominal contractions from the tip of the abdomen towards the thorax. You have when the back or the dorsal side of the termite will split open and widen. You will have a portion where the head capsule and the legs will separate from the old exoskeleton. And then you have this final phase where you have tracheal separation. And we're kind of going to talk about these individually a little bit. So here is the image from the paper. This is molting processes in the Formosan subterranean termite. And this was in the Annals of the Entomological Society of America in 2013. So you can see here, you have that dorsal breach in panel A, and in panel B, that breach expanding, so the termite's pulling its body out of that old exoskeleton. Then you can see the antennal separation in panel C, where they're actually pulling their antennae away from the old exoskeleton for the new. And then the final panel, in panel D, you can begin to see those longitudinal trunks pulling away from the old exoskeleton and moving away. So from the spherical openings. So that's what you can see here. So this part is not necessarily scientific, but as I was reading this paper, all I could do was imagine what molting must feel like to a termite. So you have that first stage where you have all of the abdominal fluid being moved from the abdomen into the thorax. So the way I imagine this feels is like horrible abdominal cramps. Researchers reported that these musculature movements reported that they lasted 3 to 5 seconds per contraction and 10 per minute. So every minute you had 10 of these, and they last 3 to 5 seconds each. And this entire phase lasts 15 minutes. So again, like terrible abdominal cramps, or maybe labor pains or something along those lines for people. Then we have this experience where the back of your old skin splits open, and then you have to peel your old skin off. So maybe you pull your legs out first, and then your head and your antennae. And then you have these long strings of these old trachea that have been ripped out of the inside of your body via the spiracles. Termites then have this jackknife posture, and we saw this in the last slide here in panel D, this jackknife posture. And then after the jackknife posture, they then like roll over on their sides and lay there for about an hour. And this is what I call the what just happened period of the molting process. So they're laying there, their body is stretched out, and they're just kind of immobile for about an hour. There's also evidence that having nestmates around is beneficial to the individual molting termite. They actually help to remove the old exoskeleton, including those tracheal tubes. They'll help to groom them. And again, I'm anthropomorphizing hardcore here, but imagine like somebody sitting over you going, you're doing great, keep going, you're almost there, just doing a little bit of coaching. So just basically caring for this individual as they're going through, again, what I feel like has got to be a very traumatic event for an immature termite. So how does this information help a PMP? So this comes down to what types of insecticides you use. If you're using a baiting system that utilizes a chitin synthesis inhibitor, then understanding this molting process is extremely important to a PMP because you rely on this molting process to affect the termites, because that's when a chitin synthesis inhibitor is going to be most effective. All right, so let's move on to fact number 11, and that is termites can eat a lot. So let's talk about how much termites can eat. So the average subterranean termite, regardless of species, can consume between 0.004 and 0.196 milligrams of food per day. And this averages out to about 0.08 milligrams per day. we know that an average native subterranean termite colony can have about 200,000 workers. And again, Formosans, an average of about 500,000 or larger. So if we take that 0.08 milligrams times 200,000 or 500,000, we can figure out in weight how much a termite can eat. And that's what we've done here. The average native subterranean termite colony can eat about 16 grams of wood per day, about 465 grams or a pound or so per month, and about 5,800 grams per year, which is about 13 pounds. So if you have Formosan termites, you're going to double all these numbers. So about 1 ounce, about 2 pounds, and about 26 pounds per year. So how does that equate to a piece of wood? The average 2x4x10 weighs between 13 and 17 pounds, and that variation is due to kiln-dried versus green lumber. So if a termite colony eats no other food, only a 2x4x10 in a structure, in 1 year, the average subterranean termite colony can consume a 2x4x10 in a year. And a Formosan colony, if it's about the same size, at 500,000 individuals, can do it in about half that time, so in about 6 months. So again, when we talk to people about how does this help you, when you talk to your homeowners, when you talk to the people who have termites, there's less of a worry to get really excited about an issue that's happening today. We have some time. It takes termites a decent amount of time to do damage. You also don't ever want to ask questions about, is this structurally sound? You really need to bring in an engineer for that. But what we do know is that termites do eat relatively slowly, as long as you're talking about your native subs. Formosans, that's a whole different ball of wax. All right, now on to our final fact for today, and that is termites can eat things other than wood. So there are two types of termites that we talk about in entomology world, and that is higher termites and lower termites. Higher termites are, you have cellulose digestion has co-evolved with the microorganisms in the gut. They generally don't have protozoans, and they're much more symbiotic with fungi and bacteria. They also can produce their own cellulase enzymes, but generally rely on these symbionts. In the lower termites, they digest wood and cellulose with the help of those gut protozoa symbionts that we talk about often. So we know right now, even just looking at these two different types of termites, there's probably going to be a difference in what they eat. And you would be right. Lower termites feed mostly on wood. These are the ones that we fight in our jobs, the lower termites. These are the ones that are going to infest structures and eat buildings. Formosans, reticulotermes, that's your lower termites. Higher termites are the ones that feed on a wide variety of food sources, including fecal material, the organic layer of the soil, grass, leaves, roots. There are even some species that, like the leafcutter ants, grow and produce fungus in their own nests that they use as a food source. That fungus is then fed by the feces of the termites, and the fungal spores pass through the digestive system, and the fungal bodies are fed back to the termites. So it's a real nice circle of life, moment for termites. So how does this final fact help a PMP? Again, there are many different species of termites here in the United States and worldwide. And many of those species, even ones in the USA, are not considered structurally important. So by making that identification and understanding how these termites feed, we are able to make a better determination on if treatment is warranted and why treatment is warranted. Yes, you have a termite that is damaging your structure, or no, these termites just build their shelter material around this piece of grass and they're never going to eat your house. So there were our 12 somewhat useful, hopefully fascinating, and in some cases strange termite facts. We covered lots of things: social behavior, nest interlopers, morphology, molting, how caste systems and caste determination happens, why termite have different castes, talked a little bit on foraging and feeding, but ultimately the goal was to help you understand basic biology, and in some cases not so basic biology, and understand how these behaviors and understanding these termite behaviors can make you a better PMP. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to the PMP folks. I appreciate you spending your time with me today. I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your support. I want to take one more minute and talk about, if you're not familiar, with our Taurus Dry product. Taurus Dry is our newest termiticide product delivered through the Precision Delivery System. If you'd like to learn more about this product, please view our website at csi-pds.com. And again, you can also contact me. My contact information is on this slide. I think the next one maybe. Here is my contact information. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions about today's presentation or about Taurus Dry featuring the Precision Delivery System.
Alrighty, thank you, Dr. Reed. We are now going to jump into some questions we received during registration and a few we also received during the presentation. So for our first question, are there areas at an account that termite techs tend to overlook? If so, what would those be?
So in my experience, most of the time when termite techs miss something, it's one of two reasons. The first boils down to termites being cryptic. Termites are like ultimate hide-and-seek champions. They hide in plain sight just beautifully. I've seen termite shelter tubes built into the rock portions of a structure that are so easy to miss. So again, just that cryptic nature of termites, to me, is one of the reasons that things get missed. The next has everything to do with our clients and boils down to visibility of the important things that we need to be able to see. So overall, over time, you see things like large built-in cabinets, large built-in bookcases that are actually going to block the visibility of a really great termite technician. And unfortunately, I don't know anyone with Superman X-ray vision powers. So until we develop that technology that's reliable, probably not going to have 100% catch on every single termite infestation.
Okay, our next question, what do you predict the swarm season will be like in 2022?
What do I predict the swarm season what?
Will be like in 2022.
Well, I'm going to hope you guys can hear me.
We can. Dr. Janis, are you there? Dr. Janis is having a bit of technical difficulties. She is getting logged back in now.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. My phone just dropped the call, so we'll jump back on. Can you repeat the question, Mackenzie?
Yes. What do you predict the swarm season will be like in 2022?
What do I predict the swarm season is going to be like? Well, it depends on part of the country that you're in. If it's been really, really dry, if it's been really, really wet, it's variable based on, I'm going to say, more of the macroclimate in your particular area. So if you have a local extension entomologist, or if you have a local university that's nearby to you, they're probably going to be able to give you much more of an idea about predicting that based on degree days, based on moisture, and what to expect for this year. Based on last year, probably going to be pretty good. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. So our third question, how long do termite reproductives live?
So obviously, depending on the species, some longer than this, but your average is probably going to be about 10 to 15 years.
Okay, and then our last question, is every single species of termite edible, or are some of them toxic for human consumption?
I don't know the answer to that, but I certainly would avoid eating the ones that feed on feces.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Reed. That was great.
All right. Well, everybody have a great day. Thanks for joining in today.
Yeah, thank you all for attending today's webinar, 12 Strange, Fascinating, and Useful Termite Facts, brought to you by Pest Management Professional Magazine and our sponsor of the event, Control Solutions, Inc. If you have any additional questions for myself, Dr. Reed, or producer Ellen Wagner, you can reach out to us directly via the contact information you see on the current slide. A recording of this webinar will be emailed to you all tomorrow and posted to mypmp.net/webinars. Upcoming webinars from PMP will also be posted to that page. Thank you all for attending the webinar, and we hope you'll join us again soon.